What's going on, everybody? Welcome, one and all, to a special emergency edition of our show here on the Blogging the Boys Podcast Network and, of course, the Blogging the Boys YouTube channel. It is Friday, January 8th, 2021. We hope all is well wherever you are. We hope you're happy, safe, healthy, and we do have some breaking news on Friday afternoon, the first Friday after the Dallas Cowboys season ended. An unfortunate start to the new year for their staff. The Dallas Cowboys making some obvious news and a bit of surprising news. The Dallas Cowboys announcing that defensive coordinator Mike Nolan and defensive line coach Jim Tomsula have been let go, have been, whatever you want to call it, fired by the team. They will not be back in 2021. Mike Nolan obviously oversaw one of the worst defenses to ever live and ever play in the NFL. And so we'd heard rumblings, obviously. It had been reported at different instances over kind of the last month that it was likely he was not going to be back, although Mike Nolan, if you're somehow unaware, is rather chummy with Mike McCarthy, Dallas Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy. They go way back. In case you forgot, Mike Nolan was the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers in 2005 and had Mike McCarthy as his offensive coordinator at the time. That was, of course, the year the 49ers took Alex Smith with the number one overall pick. Ironically, the quarterback that won the division that they were in together here this season with the Dallas Cowboys. Jim Tomsula was a head coach of the 49ers at one point in time himself, albeit for only a year, obviously following in the footsteps of Jim Harbaugh, who got an extension today of all days again with the University of Michigan. So lots of symmetry going on here. And so, yeah, I mean, the Mike Nolan thing, I think everybody saw coming a mile away. The Jim Tomsula thing is a bit of a surprise. Austin on YouTube says, I thought it said McCarthy and was like, whoa, still good to get rid of Nolan. And this is how every Cowboys fan feels. And let's be frank, let's be honest, we don't enjoy talking about people losing their jobs or people getting fired or things like that. But this defense was among the worst, again, in the history of this game. The Dallas Cowboys last week with their season on the line against an offense that had been anemic for most of the season in the New York Giants that was incidentally, again, you talk about all the irony here, led by former Dallas Cowboys head coach Jason Garrett and the Giants offensive coordinator, who, again, to go kind of crazy circle, reportedly had an interview today on Friday with the Los Angeles Chargers for their head coaching vacancy. But the Cowboys went to New York with their season on the line and they got run over. I mean, the New York Giants, before last week against the Cowboys, the previous four games, the Giants had not scored more than 3 points in a single first half. In each of the four games the Giants played before the Cowboys, they went into the locker room at halftime with no more than 3 points. They put 20 up in the first half against the Cowboys. And that was kind of what the season was for the Cowboys, right? This never-ending, display of imperfection, this never-ending run of records getting broken, records getting set. And I just, this was inevitable. I mean, shout out, of course, to the, all-encompassing Thanos. I mean, this truly was an inevitable reality. A lot of people, myself included, wondered what took so long this week. It's apparent that Mike McCarthy and his staff overall were evaluating things, doing kind of the final walkthroughs and assessments and whatever. And, the time just came for them to move on. XJMXJSB says, our defense has so much talent. We need to coach to put it together. See, I don't know that I agree with this. And so, let's think about this. And to be fair, we already talked about Jason Garrett. The Cowboys moved on from basically their entire staff last year, right? They kept Kellen Moore and, whatever. They kept Doug Nussmeier, but they moved on from their staff as a whole. You move on from your head coach, there's going to be a lot of turnover. And so that's what happened a year ago. But it should also be said that the Cowboys moved on from their defensive staff. They moved on from defensive staffers that they were really high on in Rod Marinelli and Chris Richard, and they brought in Mike Nolan. In fact, Mike Nolan was handpicked by Mike McCarthy. Jim Tomsula was a former head coach. Something we talked about when Mike McCarthy put this staff together a year ago was, look at how many head coaches, former head coaches that is, are on this staff. You had Mike Nolan, you had Jim Tomsula, you had Joe Philbin, who'd been the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, you had John Fossil, who had served as a head coach on an interim basis with the Los Angeles Rams in 2016. And so, I mean, you've got defensive staff. It's not just that the Cowboys have run into the worst defensive staffs of all time over the last 2 years, right? Like, that's the coincidence of that is not that ridiculous. it should be said that the staff is not the only problem. It should be said that the roster is part of the problem. I mean, the Cowboys do have some very talented defensive players. Names like DeMarcus Lawrence come to mind. Leighton Vander Esch when he's healthy. Trayvon Diggs looks like he's going to be a superstar. But the Cowboys have also I don't understand this Jim Tomsula firing. Honestly, if I'm speaking for myself, because Jim Tomsula was given, obviously, a defensive line that has not invested along the interior to a legitimate degree. We've been screaming forever for the Cowboys to use some legitimate draft resources to go get somebody like a Fletcher Cox, who they see twice a year. But the Cowboys don't do that. I mean, think about the defensive tackles that Jim Tomsula had to work with along the defensive line. His prize free agent was Gerald McCoy, who got hurt on literally the first practice of the season. Tristan Hill was a project that he had to work with and ultimately did work with and got legitimate play out of, and then Tristan Hill was lost for the season in the same game that Dak Prescott was in Week 5 against the Giants. And then after that, I mean, he was given Antoine Woods, and not to throw any shade or any disrespect towards Antoine Woods, but that's not a high-level investment. And the other investment he was given was Dontari Poe, who was really bad for the Cowboys and overweight, as it's been discussed many different times. What's more is Jim Tomsula not only got legitimate play out of Tristan Hill and turned that ship around, but he got legitimate play out of Neville Gallimore later in the season. So I don't know. The Mike Nolan thing is, nobody's going to argue with that, right? It makes sense to move on from your defensive coordinator if you have one of the worst defenses of all time. But the Jim Tomsula thing, that's a little bit more difficult for me to understand. And maybe it is this, sort of, okay, we're just getting rid of everybody. It's a total fire sale. We're moving on, etc. But if that's the case, then who are you going to keep? What message are you going to send? Because this defense was bad at every level. It wasn't the defensive line that was just the only thing holding them back. This defense was awful head to toe. And so, they have to figure out who they want to ultimately bring in terms of this defense overall for a long time, because this isn't a new problem for the Cowboys. Their defense has been awful forever. I mean, they had little runs. They had the second half of 2018 where they put it together, and that really boosted a lot of people's idea of what this group was, and a lot of that was Leighton Vander Esch in his rookie season and Jalen Smith capturing something very special. But mostly, this group has been very bad. I tweeted this out. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at RJ Ochoa. If you're watching on YouTube, these are the Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinators over the last 10 years. Some people define decades like the 1 year through the 10 year. That's a weird thing, but whatever. This is technically the last 10 years, last decade, however you want to look at it. In 2011 and 2012, the Dallas Cowboys trotted Rob Ryan out at defensive coordinator. In 2013, they pledged to be better. They pledged to move on. Tampa 2, that's what we're going to do. Monty Kiffin comes to town. Late in 2013, everybody's screaming to get Monty Kiffin out, promote Rod Marinelli because we saw a lot of things we liked. Rod Marinelli's making it happen. Look at Jason Hatcher, bring Henry Melton in, all that fun stuff. And Rod Marinelli held that post all the way through last season. 2014 through 2019 was Rod Marinelli in name as defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, Chris Richard had a huge hand in this over the last couple of years. And here again in 2020, Mike Nolan. Look at this list. I mean, the Cowboys have had 4 people hold the title of defensive coordinator over the last 10 years, and they're dudes who have put together some of the worst defenses in NFL history. Sure, Monty Kiffin was part of the architectural oversaw group, if I could get words together, a group that oversaw the construction of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the early 2000s that won the Super Bowl. Awesome. Nobody's taking that away from you. Rod Marinelli was on that staff. But Rob Ryan has had horrible defenses, not just in Dallas, but in New Orleans, which did come after Dallas, but still. And Mike Nolan, there was nothing to justify hiring Mike Nolan as the Cowboys defensive coordinator outside of the fact, and this isn't a justification in reality, that he was buddies with Mike McCarthy. You hear so much about, how there's preferential treatment in the NFL, and that clearly happened here. And I honestly think that look, I'm not ready to be out on Mike McCarthy by any means. I think it's totally fair to say that COVID happened, all the injuries, all the things, all the circumstances the Cowboys had to deal with. That's fair. I totally buy that Mike McCarthy should be given at the very least another year. Give him at the very least a full year with Dak Prescott. Now, that being said, Mike Nolan was one of his more specific choices. Mike Nolan was somebody whom Mike McCarthy picked. And what happened? It completely blew up in his face to the point that, again, Mike Nolan oversaw one of the worst defenses to ever live, and Mike McCarthy again, I don't want to spend forever talking about how Mike McCarthy took the 2019 season off. He watched every play in the NFL, watched every game, blah, blah, blah. But Mike McCarthy had an entire year away from the NFL to think about how he wanted to build a staff, right? And we kind of saw, at least we thought we saw, the beginnings of that ideology in the staff he assembled. That's why he went out and got all these experienced guys who had experience being head coaches in the NFL, whether on a long or short or interim basis. Now, the dude who you put a lot of eggs in the basket of, in Mike Nolan, you had to fire him 1 year in. So this is about as flagrant of a demerit as Mike McCarthy could have, while staying the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. After 1 year, his top choice almost, his first in command outside of him is the dude who he had to fire. The Jim Tomsula thing is unfortunate, obviously, but still, I mean, this is a bad look for Mike McCarthy. On the other hand, though, I do sort of applaud Mike McCarthy for being willing and being able to make the move. Maybe that's more of a glass half full situation. Maybe I'm feeling more optimistic all of a sudden, because we have seen, and we just moved away, if you're watching on YouTube, from the graphic that showed all the defensive coordinators for the Cowboys. Rod Marinelli was the Cowboys defensive coordinator from 2014 through 2019. The Cowboys refused to move on from him for so long, and I think that that's something that you can hold against Jason Garrett. So I do think that Mike McCarthy deserves the minimum level of props for being able to say, you know what, this didn't work out. I know this guy's my buddy, but I can't do this anymore. It's not responsible. It's not right. It's not, in the best interest of the team. So I have to move on. It is unfortunate. Ivan Garcia says Anthony Lynn would be a good hire. Now, Anthony Lynn obviously fired as the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. Look, I mean, Anthony Lynn's got his own issues. Anthony Lynn's been on the Cowboys staff before, but, I don't know. And people are wondering, people are asking what names are there to look at as possible replacements as defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. George Edwards is somebody who's been a defensive coordinator that is already on the Cowboys staff. And nothing against George Edwards. It's very possible that he could have success, right? It's possible that anybody could have success at this point, just based off of the idea that anything is possible. Shout out, of course, to Kevin Garnett. But speaking for just, I think, the average fan, we don't want to see that, okay? We want some change. We don't want any more of this internal promotion, because you know what's going on internally? It's not good. And so maybe that's an unfair thing to hold against George Edwards. In fact, it is an unfair thing, but we want to see something from the outside. We want to see you say, you know what we are cooking here in our building, it's not enough. It's not working. So we need to go outward. We need to think differently. We need to have somebody come in and bring in some new thought processes, some new foundations, some new principles, so that we can have that wash over us and we can do things differently. Because guess what you did last year, Cowboys? You ran it back, right? From a talent standpoint. You said, we've got the talent and we're going to add all these players. People want, not to get to the Dak Prescott thing, but people say you can't pay Dak Prescott because you got to go invest in the defense. Okay, look at the investments that the Cowboys made in the defense from a roster perspective a year ago. Dontari Poe, Joe McCoy, that's a different one because he got hurt. Clinton Dix, Daryl Worley, Everson Griffin. I mean, they are not good at this. And so maybe you should consider, bringing in somebody who has a different line of thinking than you do. And I think that yields different results. As an example, today, on Friday, the day we're talking, January 8th, 2021, the All-Pro teams came out. Spoiler alert, the Dallas Cowboys don't have a single All-Pro. Zach Martin's streak of being an All-Pro for 6 years to start his career ended in an unfortunate way. But you know who does have 2 All-Pros on the defensive side of the ball? The Indianapolis Colts. Do you know who the defensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts is? The staffer who you let walk away, and Matt Eberflus. The guys whose baskets you're putting all these chips and all these eggs and whatever else you put in baskets. We put blankets in baskets in my house. We've got too many baskets in our house. Totally different subject. I got off topic. Anyway, the point is, you let Matt Eberflus go, and now his defense is balling in Indianapolis. They're probably going to lose on Saturday tomorrow to the Buffalo Bills, but that doesn't matter because Matt Eberflus is now in the conversation to be a head coach himself. You need to get different people. You need to get different perspectives. You need to have different lines of thought because what you have going on is not enough. Damian Laverty, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Apologies if not, says, please just interview more than one person. I'd like to see Quinn. I'm a big fan of failed head coaches going back to their coordinator roles. I like that idea from a philosophical philosophical perspective. I agree with that oftentimes some guys just aren't built to be head coaches, right? And people used to say that about Jason Garrett. Granted, that's not the best example, but he's an offensive mind. Let him be a coordinator. Some guys just can't handle the overall proceedings that go into being a head coach. Some guys are really good at just handling one side of the ball. Dan Quinn is an option. Matt Patricia is an option. Don't necessarily like that really, but I like the Dan Quinn idea. Although my hesitation with Dan Quinn, and I don't know if you share this, but I get that, he's a head coach, and the Atlanta Falcons had some, I don't want to say good, but like some acceptable defenses during his time there. Dan Quinn's fame and notoriety as a defensive mind came from his time with the Seattle Seahawks, just like Chris Richard. We know that Chris Richard was not the answer for the Cowboys on the defensive side of the ball, no matter if he yells, no matter if he wears cleats during practice. So I'm just hesitant to go back to that same tree, and I'm hesitant to go back to Matt Patricia, who was a great defensive coordinator, obviously for the New England Patriots, but there's a lot wrong with that, and there was a lot, not great about his time as the head coach of the Detroit Lions. I do wonder if Mike McCarthy will want that again, right? He clearly wanted guys with that head coaching experience, which is why he targeted the people that he did for his staff. But those are the names, those are the big-time names, I think, that we're going to hear a lot of. Dan Quinn and Matt Patricia and George Edwards. That's the big one from an in-house perspective. But I think ultimately we have to say and we have to accept that it's not just a staffing issue. Clearly, the Cowboys have not had the right staff in place on the defensive side of the ball in some time. I'm not at all trying to take away from that. But you know what else? We have to start talking about the players at this point because, while granted, again, the Cowboys moved on from their entire coaching staff as a whole almost last year, the reality is that for 2 years in a row, the Cowboys have told their defensive coordinators, you know what? Don't come back. In Rod Marinelli and Chris Richard and now Mike Nolan. So kind of 3 defensive coordinators when you really look at it that way. My point in saying that is that it's also a player issue. You can't just tell me that Mike Nolan is the problem because that's what you did last year. You said, oh, you know what, Rod Marinelli, we're going to bring Mike Nolan, and he's thinking differently. He's got some 3-4 looks that he's going to mix in, and he's going to have all this going. He's changing the verbiage. Jalen Smith's going to be allowed to play more freely, and you know what? None of that really worked. And I understand that there were injuries and issues on the offensive side of the ball that make your job more difficult on defense, but it is also a player issue. I want to show you a video. This is from Jalen Smith's press conference when he signed his contract extension with the Dallas Cowboys in August of 2019. So again, we're going to rewind all the way back about a year and a half ago, August 2019. This is Jalen Smith's press conference after signing his extension with the Dallas Cowboys.
Also, I wanted to be a Cowboy for life. One of you guys interviewed me last week, and I was talking about that. Wanting to be a part of, the most prestigious brand in the world. I recognize that, and I'm a team guy as well. I'm a leader. Eventually I'm going to be a captain, for the Dallas Cowboys. I know it and I feel it, and really be able to exemplify greatness on and off the field. In order to win, you need guys, and I view myself as one of those guys. So.
The Dallas Cowboys have moved on from their defensive coordinator in each of the 2 seasons since that moment. So it's not just a Mike Nolan issue. It wasn't just a Rod Marinelli issue or a Chris Richard issue or a Jim Tomsula issue. It is an issue that is systemic. It is an issue that has multiple layers and multiple things that you have to figure out. And maybe that's what Mike McCarthy is in the process of. That's what we all can certainly hope for and cross our fingers that is ultimately going to be the case. But the Cowboys have to choose who this next defensive coordinator is very carefully. And Mike McCarthy obviously does, because again, as mentioned, it is an awful look for Mike McCarthy that he had to fire one of his good pals and his defensive coordinator after his first year with the team that he wanted to be with, after he took a year away to literally plan the whole process. So again, not a great sort of circumstance for Mike McCarthy to be in. Other names that I think we should consider, you guys are mentioning them on YouTube. Greg Williams is certainly a talented defensive mind, but you're also kind of poking a hornet's nest there if you really want to go down that road. Other people have thrown out the idea of Wade Phillips. Obviously, Wade Phillips has been the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys before and was incidentally fired after a loss to Mike McCarthy, of all people, back in 2010. Somebody else that I think is worth mentioning, and I got a tweet about this, so I'm looking here to see who it was. Shout out to Mike Flavin, I believe it's pronounced, on Twitter. Marvin Lewis. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this, but Marvin Lewis certainly made his way early in the NFL by being a defensive coordinator. Everybody knows that. Marvin Lewis was somebody whom the Dallas Cowboys interviewed to be the head coach a year ago. The only other person besides Mike McCarthy that the team interviewed. Marvin Lewis has interviewed to be a head coach in this coaching cycle. So that's, I think, I don't know if it's a possibility, but it's at least an option in a literal sense. But the Dallas Cowboys moving on from Mike McCarthy, from Jim Tomsula. We will see what ultimately happens here. It's going to be a busy couple of weeks as the Cowboys run through candidates. We'll keep you updated, of course, at bloggingtheboys.com, on all of our social channels. We're on Twitter at bloggingtheboys, on Instagram, blogging.the.boys. Go like our Facebook page. Make sure you subscribe right here to the Blogging the Boys YouTube channel. We will have a live stream on Sunday night following all the playoff games to talk about everything, maybe some defensive coordinators in terms of options that we like for the Cowboys. Of course, make sure to subscribe to the Blogging the Boys podcast network, available on all major podcast platforms. And do us a huge favor, have the absolute best weekend of all time. You know why? Because you deserve it. We will see you mañana, my friends. As always, go Cowboys and peace out.
Blogging the Boys.